the high country of Colorado. Known for the splendor of its mountains, lakes, and forests, visitors from around the world come to view the spectacle, to stand in awe at the crest of the continent. As wave upon wave of forest-clad slopes recede to the horizon, few would guess at the destruction that was once wreaked upon this land. Only those travelers who venture deep into the recesses of remote mountain hollows or pick up conversation in little mountain cafes sense the conflict stirring beneath the verdant evergreen canopy of these, our national forests. This is Bowen Gulch. At the headwaters of the Colorado River, this ancient forest still stands as a legacy to the great forests that once covered this land. It stands as a tribute to the hard work and determination of all those who resolved to save it. Through the eyes of the forest, we learn to see ourselves and our endeavors more clearly.
We don't rape the land. The Forest Service is the ones, are the people who determine how the land is being managed. We buy the contract from them and operate that contract according to their very strict specifications. We don't have a lot of leeway there. If people don't like the way the timber sales are done, are being cut, the Forest Service is really the ones responsible for it. We're just the tool they use to get the job they want done.
This area here is the little bit that was cut last winter. In my eyes, the guys did an excellent job. It's the poorest unit in the way of size of timber on the sale. This area here was where some of probably the largest wood on the whole unit was. As you can see, even here, the amount of wood that is left is that which is rotten. This will act sort of like a wounded tree. Beetles tend to get attracted to that, and they can start an infestation and multiply their numbers in something like that if it was scattered out through the whole sale. If we can concentrate them and get in and dispose of that material, part of it could go as firewood. Then we can help reduce the potential of a spruce beetle epidemic.
There's a big problem for us in the public's perception of the timber industry and logging on public lands. People just don't understand that it's not done solely to stick money in the pockets of the stockholders of Louisiana Pacific and other companies. There's a lot of other good reasons why we're doing forest management.
Louisiana Pacific, Georgia Pacific, Boise Cascade, Weyerhaeuser, all you big timber giants, listen up. 95%! And I'm a mathematician, I can count. 95%! Can you hear me? On our ancient forest are gone! When the hell are we gonna start preserving them? When they're all gone! I'm mad as hell, and I ain't gonna take it anymore!
While some people have long been concerned about the destruction of forest ecosystems, the recent escalation of logging activity worldwide has drawn criticism from a broad sector of the American public. Mathematics professor Marty Walter at the University of Colorado in Boulder is alarmed at the rapid devastation of our Native American forests.
If we destroy the last 5% of our ancient forests, we will have burned the library before we read the books. We've only been studying ancient forests for less than 2 decades. You got that? We've been cutting them for 200 years. We've been studying them for less than 2 decades. Time is short. We've got years, not decades, to turn this thing around.
When European settlers first came to this continent, they found a land lush with trees. Knowing only the ways of their European ancestors, the settlers began clearing the land for farms and cities. As their population increased, so did the need for new agricultural land and timber. The frontier pushed west, driving before it the edge of the virgin forest. By 1850, large holes had been carved in the once continuous forests of the east. Then, lured on by discoveries of gold in California and Colorado, civilization moved west. Almost overnight, the great Colorado forest became legends of the past. Sawmills worked around the clock to supply mines with timber, and the miners with cabins. The railroads, too, consumed vast quantities of wood to fuel the engines and support the track. In less than 3 decades, the damage to Colorado's forests was enormous. A century later, the trees have returned, but the forests bear little resemblance to the magnificent ones that once stood here. Those few examples of ancient forest that were spared by fire, disease, insect, and saw lie in remote valleys far up in the headwaters of obscure drainage basins, like Bowen Gulch. High on the moist, north-facing slopes of a 12,000-foot ridge lies one of the most spectacular forests in Colorado. Trees here are believed to reach ages of 600 years and grow up to 5 feet in diameter, quite remarkable given the rigors of the high-altitude climate. Moss-laden trees, lichen-draped boughs, flower-strewn meadows, and diverse wildlife are here in full measure. Once considered for inclusion in both Rocky Mountain National Park and the Never Summer Wilderness area between which it lies, Bowen Gulch is evidence of our nation's changing values. As part of the Arapahoe-Roosevelt National Forest, this pristine area is under the management of the U.S. Forest Service. It is a common misconception that national forests are managed like parks, with emphasis on preservation. Quite the contrary. They are managed for a broad spectrum of uses, including timber harvest.
The basis for management of any unit of the National Forest System is the forest plan. And that's a document that's put together under a very complex set of regulations under the National Forest Management Act. And the plan for the Arapahoe-Roosevelt National Forest was the basis for the land management prescriptions and the decision to proceed with planning for timber management in the Bowen Gulch area.
Timber management, as the Forest Service prefers to call logging, is in fact the first calling of the federal agency. Approximately 70,000 acres of old-growth forest are cut on federal land every year nationwide. Only those parts of the forest that Congress has set aside as wilderness areas are fully protected from logging. Under congressional mandate to manage the national forests under a concept of multiple use, the Forest Service constructs a number of creative rationales to justify high levels of timber harvest. These rationales are being increasingly challenged by a wide range of scientists, conservationists, and those who just enjoy a stroll in the woods. Perhaps the most controversial of these rationales is the idea that wildlife habitat can be improved by logging.
Yeah, using elk as an example, they're more of an edge species where you have dense timber for bedding and cover during the day, intermixed with aspen openings which will provide forage. You'll find them in the edge or the ecotones between different habitat types, as opposed to probably most of them being out in the middle of a large expanse of old growth. Those are the areas that we would likely want to make openings and give some diversity to the structure.
While there is logic to this rationale, the controversy comes from the fact that while several species benefit, many others suffer. As habitat increases for broad-ranging species such as elk and mule deer, it diminishes for animals such as the pine marten, three-toed woodpecker, red-backed vole, and flammulated owl. In spite of their colorful names, these animals and birds are seldom seen by humans because they prefer the solitude of unbroken old-growth forest. Dennis Lowry, a wildlife biologist, explains what happens to these species when areas are open to human exploit.
You're probably doing two things. You may introduce competition from other more generalist type species, and you're also reducing the area that the interior species that are more site-specific in terms of their habitat requirements. You're reducing what they have to live on.
More and more, the interior forest species, those species that need some isolation, that don't do well with human disturbance, and they depend on the forests, the tightly knit forests, the roadless areas, are being invaded and moved out by the generalist species. You'll see robins a lot more places now. Some of the warblers and the songbirds that live in the interior, it's been determined by bird counts that their numbers are going down.
The loss of habitat for reclusive species is a concern to conservationists like Ann Vickery, who represents the Colorado Mountain Club. Primarily a recreation-oriented group, they were one of the first to realize the importance of public involvement in the national forest planning process.
Well, when the forest plans started coming out in about 1983 and 84, 85, and citizens groups became aware that they were all directed at very heavy timber cuts and not at recreation. And this is very much an area, Colorado and Region 2, that should be oriented towards recreation.
In 1980, 81, the Colorado Wilderness Bill was passed that basically took portions of the rare two areas that were inventoried in 78 and 79, added them to the National Wilderness System, took a few of the areas and made them further study areas, but released the great majority of those areas for regular national forest management. Since that time, we've been making orderly entrances into those areas for timber management purposes.
When we asked, why do you have to cut in the roadless areas, why can't you cut outside the roadless areas, they said, well, these areas have been heavily cut, and we'll violate our standards and guidelines if we go back into them.
Our whole allowable harvest that was really allocated in the forest plan was based on the orderly entrance into these roadless areas. And by not entering the roadless areas, of course, that really compromises the amount of timber that we can offer on a sustained basis.
But conservationists and scientists are concerned with sustaining more than timber harvests. While not ignoring the need for timber, they feel it is perhaps more important in the long run to sustain the integrity and health of ecosystems. And old growth is an essential component of the forest ecosystem.
Old growth is an essential part of biodiversity. Per unit area, you probably get more forms of different species of animals and plants in certain situations with old growth than you do without old growth.
It is another common misconception that existing wilderness areas encompass vast amounts of old-growth forest. As this view of the Never Summer area shows, much of the wilderness reserves are above timberline and contain only a fringe of trees. The Bowen Gulch sale area is in the foreground.
I don't believe it to be that unique. I know of other areas like this. If it was so unique, why in the Rare 1 and the Rare 2 studies and the original Wilderness Bill was it totally tossed out?
For whatever reasons, probably a combination of the recreation potential for snowmobiles, for example, and the high-quality timber values that were present, the potential for some water yield enhancement, and the balancing that Congress goes through when they put some areas in and leave some areas out resulted in the decision not to include it.
Had more been known about the value of old-growth ecosystems when that decision was made in 1980, perhaps Bowen Gulch would have been placed in the wilderness system. But only recently have scientists learned of the key roles old growth plays in the life cycles of numerous animals, large and small. While knowledge concerning old growth was limited in the early 80s, input from the timber industry was not. Having nearly depleted their own private lands, timber companies began to rely more and more on public forests to supply their demand.
You know, the people want wood products, and they're going to get them from somewhere. When there's a demand, it's usually met.
I think wilderness areas are super. I think our country is blessed richly to be able to afford to set aside these areas. I guess the question comes, how much area can you set aside before it starts hurting? The heck with industry. Industry wouldn't be there if the demand wasn't there.
The demand for wood products isn't getting less, it's getting greater.
Pressure, both direct and indirect, were brought to bear on the Forest Service to increase the amount of timber offered for sale.
John B. Crowell, who's heard of him?
Yeah.
Head lawyer for Louisiana Pacific, was appointed Assistant Secretary of Agriculture over the Forest Service in 1981. The corporations not only have undue influence, they are the government. In this case, that's when Bowen Gulch went down. We didn't know about it. Nobody knew about it.
George Edwards, the district ranger in charge of the Bowen Gulch area, discounts the charge that anything was done behind the public's back.
The people in Grand County, where I was up in Jackson County, timber cutting was very much a part of the local economy. It was an accepted practice that had been going on for 30 or 40 years, and so our scoping basically indicated that. Said that there's probably not going to be a lot of controversy.
The primary and secondary manufacturers of wood products in Colorado combined are $1 billion a year industry, which is nothing to sneeze at. It's not on a scale with tourism or agriculture in the state, but still it's an important industry. It's particularly important to some of the small towns like Kremling and Walden, where most of the mills are located, because they a lot of times tend to be the backbone of the economy in those areas.
The environmental analysis was completed, and there was public involvement at that time, and there was not concurrence or agreement with the sale in some quarters.
Rocky Smith monitors Forest Service timber sales for the Colorado Environmental Coalition. He first visited Bowen Gulch in 1988.
I'd never been into the area before. I knew that a timber sale was scheduled there, and we decided we'd go up and take a look at it, and I was horrified by what I saw. I saw an incredibly wonderful, intact, old-growth ecosystem with not only large trees, but dense undergrowth. You could see the dynamism of the ecosystem.
We did think that there had been enough changes in the sale plan to allow it to proceed with perhaps consent, if at least not support. And so the sale was put under contract, and the successful bidder was Louisiana Pacific.
In the case of Bowen Gulch, we, of course, looked at the sale. We did our own appraisal on it, determined what that timber was worth to us to our Kremling and Walden operations, where it would be delivered to. And we just, through our appraisal, our own activity, and looking at the sale, decided it was worth to us what they advertised it for. Therefore, we bid on the sale. We were the only bidder. We were awarded the sale, and I guess from that point on, things started to get a little hectic.
You'd see a log that probably fell 50 years ago was pretty well decayed, and you'd see little nurse, it was a nurse log. You'd see little itty-bitty seedlings coming out of it, and it was just horrifying to me that that was about to be cut. I thought this is the best example of old growth with the biggest trees that I have ever seen in Colorado.
Like
Still is.
They're cutting down Bowen Gulch. And I go, what? And they were. The bloody guys were in there cutting the thing down.
The stuff really hit the fan, I guess, last summer when we started to go in there to build the road, and then a little bit later when we started to log the sale. We had a lot of people up there protesting. They had a tree setting, I think it was back in August of '89, where it was in the newspapers, where they had several people pull wooden platforms up in the trees and set up there for several days, as a symbolic protest of the logging. They chained themselves to a gate to block some trucks from going out that were actually coming off of the Spike Creek sale.
I gave up. Then what happened in the summer of 1989 was that a lot of people, some people associated with Earth First and many others, decided to make an example out of Bowen Gulch, it being a prime example of old growth ecosystem, as I said. So they did a tree sit. They got a lot of publicity. It got in the media. That got a lot more people involved, and it kind of coalesced to the point where there was this big movement led by Marty Walter to try to, stop the cutting in Bowen Gulch. We wrote letters.
During the early stages of the protest, attention was focused on the unique qualities of old-growth forests and the limited amount of those prized natural resources. What soon became apparent was that no one could really say with authority how much old growth was left. Was Bowen really unique? No one knew.
I don't believe it to be that unique.
But we encourage people to go up there and look at the trees, because we thought that really speaks louder than anything CEC or anyone else could say about it. Even pictures, as valuable as they are, and we have a fair number of those, we don't feel tell the entire story.
I've been spending the last couple of days tramping around in some of these drainages, and I've seen the end product of some of the Forest Service management practices. I've seen what happens when you open up some of these areas to a little bit of sunlight. I'm not asking you to believe me on this. I'm asking each and every one of you to go up into Bowen Gulch, look at it, and realize what a unique ecosystem this is. Don't take my word for it. Don't take anybody's word for it who's speaking here. Go up and look at it. Don't just notice the big trees up there. Notice the conditions of the soil. Notice how much erosion there is. There isn't any erosion up there. Go up and look at it hard, and then walk up and over any of these ridges. Rocky said he flew over these areas this morning. I've been walking through them. You can walk it. They're all a day hike from here. They're all clear cut. Go and look at the conditions of the soil there. Look at the runoff there. Look at big tree stumps there. Make a decision on your own whether old growth forest is worth saving. Then do something about it, and that's what I'm here to tell you.
say, like, well, the ones that are disintegrating, like, I bet they've been sitting there for 50 years. And the ones that have just fallen down, I bet they've been growing and living for about, 100, probably like 400 years.
And so many people did go to Bowen Gulch. Through the eyes of the forest, they came to better see the connection between all living things, that humankind indeed did not weave the web of life. We are merely a strand in it. Whatever we do to the web, we do to ourselves. And those who saw joined the campaign to save Bowen Gulch.
Okay, October 2021, Capitol Steps protest. And I will never forget the 8 people that slept on those Capitol steps.
I think it partly started last summer. I went to Oregon and traveled around the state. It was the first time I'd been to Oregon. And saw the extensive logging there. If you haven't seen it, you don't have any kind of perception as to the destruction that's going on. Just whole mountains denuded of trees. Later in October, a friend of mine, Marty Walter, organized a memorial service for a tree stump on the state capitol steps. And that was when I got involved. And he had a 24-hour vigil. And at the vigil, we decided to go up that weekend to Bowen Gulch and see it. And we traveled up there with a Native American medicine man and built a medicine wheel in Bowen Gulch to pray for the spirit of the forest. And it just, the whole experience of that weekend just sort of set me on fire. I became a born-again tree hugger, I feel like.
I swear, just having anyone with any ecological conscience at all going up there makes them an instant ally in this battle.
So, since then we've organized massive letter writing campaigns. We've gotten a lot of people involved, and they've tried, a lot of strategies. Rocky Smith with the Colorado Environmental Coalition, negotiating with the Forest Service in Louisiana Pacific.
We talked to Louisiana Pacific. They, till very recently, have not been cooperative at all. They have been wasting our time through a lot of they've just been wasting our time by acting like they want to negotiate when it appears that they really don't when you get right down to it. They want to log that sale.
Well, yeah, there was a meeting last fall. I met with a number of people and discussed the sale, and at that time, well, what they asked me was, what can we do to get you out of Bowen Gulch? What do you want? You want money? Whatever. And we didn't want money. What we wanted at that time, the only thing that I could think of that we would really consider to not harvest Bowen Gulch was, timber, other timber, which is eventually what the compromise evolved to anyway. And I told them those people that at that time. I also told them we were really unhappy about the terrorist activities going on up there. And it was kind of a problem for us to give up a sale just because of that, because we didn't want to lend any credence to what those people were doing and make them believe that what they had done was, had forced us to give up the sale. And that's been one of our concerns all along, because, the terrorist activity, I don't care what your justification for it is, it's just plain wrong. You're doing things that hurt people, potentially physically, but it hurt people who, in their course of making their living. And I don't care whether it's in the Middle East or it's hijacking airplanes or it's people doing some of these things on Bowen Gulch. It's just not right, and it's not acceptable. And we would never consider backing down to that kind of activity.
It's a tough way to make a living, about all you can say for it.
guys gonna be around about a half hour? Come on up there, we just need lunch up the road if you want to talk.
In a desperate effort to save the trees in Bowen Gulch, some people resorted to illegal measures. Even before the Forest Service sold the timber, steel spikes were driven deep into the wood, a hazard to saws and loggers both. While not harmful to the trees, the theory was that the spikes would discourage anyone from cutting the trees or buying the sale.
You ever run into it?
I've never hit one, no. I've been real lucky.
Yeah, there's been other guys that have seen them, you know, but he tried to just avoid it and not cut where the spikes are. Yeah,
What would happen if you hit one?
Well, tear your saw chain up to start with.
Loggers Pat and Schmitty work for Winter Logging, a Louisiana Pacific contractor working near Bowen Gulch. They talk of the dangers of encountering
Too
tree
much,
spikes.
and they can come right up in your face.
Our sawmill in Granby's hit one before and just sent the tooth right through the roof of the building. Didn't injure no one, luckily. That's bull crap, you know, people don't need that. It's hazardous enough, you know, just logging without somebody tampering with your equipment.
Yeah.
It was a couple years ago, during the winter time, it was during hunting season, we had some people mess with every piece of equipment we had up here. It was just down the road, just a quarter of miles.
What did they do?
They stole all our tools, jammed all the locks and the keys for the keys. Anything they could screw up, they screwed up. Moved one of the machines.
Was that hunters then, or?
I think it was our first. That was just the start of their
Would they think it was part of Bowen?
I think they just did it on their way up to Bowen.
Went up there one morning to go to work, and there was about 25 of them.
Chained to a gate
Had
up there.
themselves chained to the gate.
Heard about that,
Yeah.
Had trucks were in loading behind the gate,
That was
ready
on
to come out, and they couldn't get out because they had themselves chained to the
Yeah,
gate.
and that was our sale. That was on the Supply Creek sale too.
Oh yeah?
So what'd they do, go around the gate or some way?
And they had to wait for the sheriff to come up and make the people unchain themselves. So the guy could go to work, you know. And an experienced driver to boot. It was on a hill where if he wouldn't have been paying attention, it was early in the morning, so it's still dark. Perhaps he could have ran right over him, killed every one of them. But he's seen them, luckily. Didn't run him over, I would have ran him over.
Watch the truck. Watch the truck. You got time. Truck. All right, relax yourselves. Get in good space. No stumps today.
I have dreamed on this mountain since first I was my mother's daughter, and you can't just take my dreams away.
Does anybody identify themselves as in charge?
No, we're a consensus group. We don't have any leaders to make decisions every year.
I see. The sheriff and the county, you're blocking access. It's a legal access road. I'm asking at this point to leave. Okay. Anybody want to respond to that?
Anybody not understand?
Do you understand?
Yeah.
Can we discuss it?
Say about all this. Been up here 2 days now dealing with this.
Well, I'm up here every weekend dealing with watching those first people.
Yeah?
We work up here.
Well, how's it been going so far?
No problems. Just they're here walking around, that's all.
What do you think about what they're trying to do?
Well, man, I hate to get started on that.
Well,
I'm a logger. I believe in cutting these trees down for economics. And forest management's the big thing. you know, too. You got to manage these forests. You can't not cut no trees. You can't save trees, you know, the old trees and stuff. They're dying, they're dead. You get up here and cut them down, we lose one out of every 10 trees, completely rot. We put 6 foot off of each one, just from rot. You got to rejuvenate this forest.
They say that you cut 30%, 10 years, 10 years to cut another 30%, 30 years, another 30 years from now that there's not going to be any of this old growth left.
Well, what's growing now is going to be old growth in 100 years. You know.
These trees are 600 years old. How does 100 years?
There ain't a tree up here over 200 years old.
I beg to differ. I've counted rings on trees up here. There's got to be trees that are older than that up here. These are some of the largest trees in Colorado. I've been all over the state, in the woods everywhere. And I'll go tooth and nail with you with a dendrochronologist who will come up here and tell you that these trees are older than 200 years.
We're not cutting all the old trees. If you just walk up here a little ways, you'll see we leave most of the.
I saw most of the orange marks, which indicate trees that are to be cut on some of the biggest trees up here. I hiked through here yesterday, and just in the road right away, there were several trees that 2 people couldn't even put their arms around. And these trees, looked at them, they were felled. There was no rot whatsoever in these trees. And that's not really even a good argument, because that's basically saying that if the tree rots, it's good for nobody, but it's good for the forest. Rotting is a natural part of the process here that recycles the nutrients back into the forest.
Oh man, I can't argue with these people. I'm just a working man. You know, I'm up here doing my job and been going on. I've been logging this county for 30 years.
Has the company given any direction on what to do? How to respond to this
LP?
Yeah.
No. We're just trying to be nice and not getting any problems with them, and hope they don't terrorize us and stuff.
Well, we certainly appreciate that sort of position, and we did want to go on the record as saying that we are not the type of people that would jeopardize your personal safety or your home or your children or your family.
You already have.
85,000 contractors.
Yeah, well, not only that, but you've pounded nails in these trees. We've taken bucketfuls of nails out. That'll kill a cutter right away.
As an organization, there's no link between us and doing that. That's an individual action. If somebody feels that that's something that they want to do that's an appropriate measure, I can't be accountable. Look, I just wanted to let you know that collectively we have all decided that we're not here to harm you guys in any way or personally.
I don't believe
it's your livelihood, and we understand that.
A portion of the sale had been spiked prior to it even being advertised, and the Forest Service was aware of this. They found a couple areas where there were spikes in trees, and they in fact made an allowance in the appraisal for whoever bought the sale to go out and pull those spikes out, because it was going to be an additional cost. And we were aware of it. We went out last August and pulled out several hundred spikes, went out with a metal detector, and we hadn't got them all. There's still a lot left.
Those who took measures into their own hands by spiking trees felt they had just cause. Their intention, they claim, was not to hurt someone, but to stop the logging. They felt the Forest Service was deaf to their verbal protests, and they acted out of frustration. They felt sure that no reasonable company would expose workers to the hazardous spikes, but reason was turned against them by an industry determined to show no weakness.
In my opinion, these terrorist-type activities really wouldn't stop anybody from operating a sale. They're a nuisance factor, no question. They cost us some money. They're a problem. They were a concern. They're a worry. But when you look at the overall cost, you know,
there was our first people all the time up here. Our guard, you know, one would be talking to him and the other would be sneaking around trying to do something. And that guard we had, he was an old, you know, soldier of fortune type guy. He had booby traps and shit set up, so when they went behind the equipment, it just tripped a trip line, you know. He knew they were back there.
Shortly thereafter, Mr. Winter's road grader met an unfortunate end.
Somebody came out during the night and poured a mixture of sand and water into this crankcase and took the oil filter off and packed it with sand, and that ended up destroying an engine that cost about $12,000 to have rebuilt.
I want to say something. Mr. Winter is really not our enemy. We're all in this together. If Bowen Gulch is not cut, we are all going to be winners, including Louisiana Pacific and Mr. Winter, but they just haven't figured it out yet. Okay?
Gary Ullman of Louisiana Pacific discussed the illegal activity issue with activist Marty Walter.
He asked me what I thought about all this terrorism. I said, hey man, terrorism is when you hit the tarmac with blazing guns, killing people. Okay? You have violated the Clean Air Act in Olathe, Colorado every day since 1983. I have had people call me up who are scared of you. I think that's terrorism. And I think they might change. There's hope. We got to get them into recycling. I'm serious. They can change if we have enough people to change them. They can be educated. Now I want to apologize to Mr. Winter. If he's here or not, there's somebody from the press. Take my apologies to Mr. Winter. I'm very sorry that his road grader was trashed. Mr. Winter's just a nice guy, like my dad was, doing his job. He's not making a big policy decision. He's just trying to make a living. But I will say this. If that road grader had not been trashed, there would be no Bowen Gulch to rally for today. And that is a fact. It's true. You may not like it, but it's the truth.
Well, I think they just got tired of the group Earth First, you know. I think they just got tired of them. I mean, you can't have, like Jim's equipment's been damaged 3 times already, so, you know, our equipment, you can't afford to have, yeah, it's too much crap, you know. It's too dangerous. We don't need to log at that, but, you know, don't need to go broke just trying to log a small place like that, you know.
Even giving it in to them on Bowen Gulch wouldn't be so bad if they quit now. Yeah. Leave it alone, but they're not going to. Yeah. When another good sale comes up, they'll be right there too.
Yeah, they're just terrorists. That's all they are. I would like to find some of them and destroy some of their equipment, their cars, their house. See how they like it, their jobs. It's tough some days when we've came up here and went to go to work. We get paid for logging. When we can't log, we don't make any money, so it's pretty tough.
Yeah, I
some
guess
days.
Jim's had some downtime because of his equipment.
Yeah, yeah. And I just had a baby, so I don't need nothing like that. I need to work every day.
You know, our bottom line is we need timber to operate our mills, to keep our employees working.
In the winter of 1989, Louisiana Pacific suspended road building activity in Bowen Gulch until snowmelt the following summer. Negotiations to permanently halt logging in the old-growth forest had stalled because of issues that were beyond the control of those at the bargaining table. Time was precious to conservationists. Success would depend on their ability to mobilize a large enough segment of the public to command the attention of the Forest Service and ultimately on the goodwill of the timber company.
We got 6 months to work, so we hit the streets. We got over 1,000 letters to Tim Worth and to Gary Cargill. Bowen Gulch became a household word in the Forest Service.
There were a lot of citizens organizing themselves, getting together, and it's a very important thing to do. You know, without that kind of citizen input, Bowen Gulch would be being timbered today.
We strongly encourage people to write letters to the Forest Service saying, save Bowen Gulch, find some substitute timber elsewhere, writing to Senator Worth and other politicians to educate themselves and other people, to talk to their co-workers, to talk to their family and friends, and anyone else they came in contact with about Bowen Gulch. We strongly encourage.
As the sale grew near to being operated, it became clear that there was a significant group of folks who disagreed with the decision and had never really bought into the idea that the sale ought to proceed. And they let their feelings be known. They asked for a meeting with me, and I met with them. I could tell they felt very deeply about the issue. And we began to get a large number of letters from adults and school children alike.
Like if a human were to get their house torn down by animals, they wouldn't really feel too good, you know, because they wouldn't have a home. And like animals probably have feelings too. And they're in it for the money, and they don't care. Oh, animals. They just think about themselves. If everybody recycled in the whole world, then no one would have to cut down one more tree.
Dude, what is he going to care about the whole class of 6th graders?
Is it okay to just sit back and let things happen?
No.
Is it okay to say I'm just a 6th grader and nobody
It's just
cares?
like not voting.
No,
You gotta be an
exactly.
activist.
It's just like not voting.
The letters did make a difference.
It was of sufficient volume and intensity that we took it seriously and knew that we were dealing with a segment of the public that was upset with the decision we had made. And we agreed to look for options to see if there was something we might do that would relieve the tension.
It was just a matter of education and getting the facts out, and I guess we were pretty well steamrollered on that, you know.
Under pressure from the public and members of Congress, the Forest Service began to seek alternatives to cutting in Bowen Gulch. With a valid contract in hand, however, LP was under no obligation to relinquish Bowen's timber. As spring passed and the date for renewed operations approached, the threat of violent confrontation loomed over Bowen Gulch like the storm clouds of late afternoon. When it appeared that negotiations had again stalled, conservationists deployed one final strategy, an economic boycott engineered by Boulder businessman Richard Green. Green often shares his successful negotiation techniques with fellow conservationists.
The environmentalists needed a unified approach to enter into the negotiations with Louisiana Pacific and the Forest Service. We needed to all agree on what we were trying to accomplish so that they couldn't divide us at the negotiation table. One of the things that we had to do with the environmentalists was to convince them that we weren't there to change anybody's minds, but we were there to get them to act. We didn't care if they believed what we believed in. What we cared about is them not cutting the old growth trees in Bowen Gulch. The problem was that in negotiations you need to give something of value to get something of value, and we didn't have anything of substantial value to give to LP to get them to get out. So we came up with the idea of, after the negotiations broke down, of going to the city and the county of Boulder and asking them to stop buying Louisiana Pacific's products until they stopped cutting Bowen Gulch trees. And we tried to get additional citizens around the community involved, and Dale had some ideas on that one to work on.
Louisiana Pacific is a hard company to boycott. They don't have toilet paper on the shelves of the grocery store, so you can organize a boycott and say, you know, okay, everybody don't buy LP toilet paper. It's a little more difficult to...
Consumer boycotts often take a long time to make their impact, and Green was looking for quick results. The backbone of his strategy was to enlist the city and county governments of Boulder to back the cause. He took a resolution to the Boulder City Council. Boulder Mayor Leslie Durgan.
We asked him a number of questions, and then at the end of citizen participation, crafted a resolution and passed it, which stated that the city of Boulder, if there were cutting in the old growth forest up at Bowen Gulch, would not purchase any Louisiana Pacific product through our own purchasing department, and that we would encourage others to follow suit and boycott, in essence, Louisiana Pacific.
Boulder County commissioners heard both sides of the argument and also sided with the conservation community, enacting a boycott of LP products.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to adopt this resolution. Those in favor say aye. Aye. That motion carries unanimously. Perhaps this resolution will send a message to some old growth corporate leadership that it's time for a little new growth, there as well. Yes.
And a good neighbor.
That's right.
According to environmentalists, this was the straw that broke the camel's back.
No, you can't make your decisions based simply on a boycott. It's a factor, you know, you consider it because, you know, we're in business to sell our product, and we don't like to have a boycott, especially when we think it's for not for a good reason. We didn't agree with the reasoning, and I'd put the boycott somewhat in the same light as the terrorist activity. we wouldn't have given up Bowen Gulch simply because there was a boycott of our product.
I think the other reason that it made it so effective in Boulder is one of our major developers, the McStain Corporation, headed by Tom and Caroline Hoyt, called one of their major suppliers and said, cancel our order if it involves Louisiana Pacific. Public and private pressure worked.
So after just having been chewed out by another lumber supplier, I called Caroline Hoyt and was rather nervous about it and was really surprised to get such a warm reception. The first thing she said was, I've been looking for some way to help in this fight to save Bowen Gulch.
Really, the thing that started us going was the fact that Dale Green called me terrified. She was really terrified. She said she heard that we were builders that might be environmentally sensitive and asked if we would be willing to consider boycott of Louisiana Pacific. And I think she was just stunned when we said, yeah, we would. We did a little research after that.
Well, Carolyn and I spent a lot of time talking about it and trying to decide how do you make a responsible decision about it? How do we figure out whether this is a legitimate issue or not? And finally decided you went to the hearings that were held before
the county commissioners, yeah.
And also talked to our suppliers a little bit.
And we really felt like it was a valid issue and something we could responsibly boycott. So at that point, which took a couple of days to make that decision, then we agreed and called, Tom called Alpine Lumber, and they told them we wouldn't buy any more Louisiana Pacific.
Right.
4 other builders signed up just immediately and said that they would be delighted to participate in a boycott, that they were concerned also about the same issue. So it looked like, just as we started doing it, that in fact this could easily gain momentum and start impacting lots and lots of builders in Colorado.
There was, we came to the conclusion this spring that there was so much sentiment against the sale, even though we didn't feel we felt that a lot of the people really didn't understand what the sale and what the issues were about, that we would go ahead and propose to give up the sale in exchange for the other timber. And that's where we're at today.
And they were willing to allow us the time to try and find substitute volume. And they didn't have to do that, but they did. And it was a very cooperative move on the part of Louisiana Pacific to enter into that agreement with us.
I think Forest Service needed to take more action in the thing myself. They're too chicken shit. Too chicken shit to do anything about it. Because they're the ones that own the land, They should be able to do. They're the ones ramrodding everything, Crying out loud,
We work for the American people, and when a significant number of those people start questioning what we're doing, and when a senator gets several thousand letters that's from constituents that feel like we're really messing up, then to me it's not a cop-out to step back and take another look at what you're doing.
Frankly, I don't think Bowen Gulch has been very well studied as an ecosystem to catalog what all is there. What depends on other things. We could be giving away something that's priceless, not just in terms of the forest.
We concentrated earlier in the summer on doing some inventory of old growth in that area because that was one of the key issues, and it was one in which our critics were legitimately concerned. The fact that we did not have a good inventory of the broader question of old growth, and had difficulty putting that Bowen Gulch sale in the context or in the perspective of a much broader question of how much old growth is there.
And so belatedly, but nevertheless, the Forest Service set about to answer the question that so frequently was asked. Just how special is Bowen Gulch?
I'll go up from here and try measuring some of this. Probably the notable feature about Bowen is that it was an extensive area of old growth, one of the larger, more contiguous areas of old growth that we found.
Sound right.
There's not a whole lot of the really, really excellent stuff. Bowen Gulch was excellent.
And so a very special forest indeed was spared. But for how long can special places be preserved when a larger question remains unanswered? What shall we do for wood tomorrow if we do not use what we cut today more wisely? Will Bowen Gulch someday be hauled to the city dump as waste paper and soiled diapers simply because we failed to learn a lesson from the forest we once fought so hard to save?
It's just great to be just a small part of something as monumental as this. I think it's the first time that something like this has probably ever been done. I've never read about it. And I hope it's the start of many more, because citizens, we own this. And citizens have to rise up all over this country and maybe all over the world and say we own it. We want it. We want ours.